All right.
What, will someone tell me when it's there?
Yeah, we'll leave a message in the chat.
All right, I'll try to multitask. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Culture Connection speaker series, where we're talking about how Americans in different fields are working with their interest and knowledge in Russian art, society, culture, and history, and sharing that passion for Russian culture with others. We'll also see how American attitudes and tastes have changed over the years and how Americans are connecting on a cultural level with Russia. My name is Michael Beckelheimer, and I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. This program is presented by the American Center of Moscow, which is supported by the American Embassy in Moscow. If you're watching on the American Center's YouTube, VK, or Telegram channels, please post comments and questions. Ask us anything you want, anytime. We'll take questions as they come in. If you want Russian subtitles, you can select closed captioning in Russian. So today we're talking about environmentalism in Russia. And with us is Kate Pride-Brown, an environmental and political sociologist whose research focuses on environmental activism in Russia and conservation policy in the United States. She received her doctorate from Vanderbilt University, completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Vanderbilt Institute for Energy and Environment. Her book, Saving the Sacred Sea, The Power of Civil Society in an Age of Authoritarianism and Globalization, examines the conflict between local and transnational environmentalists, multinational corporations, and the Russian government over the future of Lake Baikal. As you know, the largest, deepest, and oldest freshwater lake on Earth. She teaches now at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. And while she continues to study environmental issues in Russia, especially around Lake Baikal, Dr. Brown has also published research on water and energy politics and policy in the United States. She's currently studying the nuclear renaissance in the southeastern United States. Kate, welcome to the series. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So that was a very sort of academic introduction. Can you tell us in your own words, like, what do you do, who you are?
Oh goodness, well, I wrote that, so I'm going to tell you the same thing. I am a sociologist, which means I study people and society, and larger trends and patterns in society. And I have always been very passionate about environmental issues and Russia, and so I decided to combine those two in my work. And was drawn to Lake Baikal, especially, I think, because of how wonderful it is as a place, how fascinating, and did my dissertation work there.
Well, let me ask, which came first, the interest in Russia or the interest in environmental activism?
Oh, Russia, definitely. I honestly can't remember a time I wasn't interested in Russia. I think that I get asked a lot where this interest came from. So I've answered this question repeatedly, so I know the answer. And the answer really that I've reflected on is that Russia was always in the news when I was growing up, always. So like every time my parents turned on the news and watched it, it was what's going on in Moscow. And I have very vivid, childhood memories of Gorbachev. And I was just like, wow, who is that? What is that place? And I had a map of the world. And at the time it was the USSR. And there was this large stretch of land. I was like, my goodness, that's a lot of land. What's happening over there? So just from the earliest time, I was very curious and interested and wanted to know more. And I think it was also in high school I started reading Russian history, which also was very long compared to United States history and full of revolutions and anarchists. And I was like, wow, there's some interesting people doing interesting things over here. And comparatively to how we teach history in high school in the United States, I thought, wow, that place is interesting and my place is boring. Turns out I was wrong. United States history is very interesting too. But my impression as a young person was that very interesting things happened in Russia. So in the university, I had the opportunity to finally learn the language and study abroad, and it's just been a solid part of my life ever since.
And you went to university where did you go?
Sarah Lawrence College.
In Virginia.
No, New York.
Oh, New York. Sorry. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so was there a strong Russian program there?
It's a very small college, so about maybe 1,000 people at the time that I was there. So it's hard to have a really strong program or anything, but there was a wonderful, wonderful faculty member. I'll just call her out. Melissa Fraser teaches Russian language and literature there. And so it was with her, I was exposed to Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and modern Russian authors as well. She's fantastic. But also the anthropology program there. So I studied anthropology and Russian studies. And then I studied abroad through Middlebury College, which does have a fantastic Russian program.
Right. Yeah, it's a common theme, Gorbachev and Dostoevsky, So you said you studied abroad there through Middlebury. Where did you go? When were you there? What was it like?
I was there in 2001, 2002, and I lived in Yaroslavl, which was a beautiful city. So a wonderful introduction to Russia, the golden ring of historical cities there. And I lived with a very energetic, interesting woman who had a beautiful apartment right on the Naberezhnaya. That is Irkutsk, but but still, I have a lot of happy memories of Yaroslavl. I danced ballet there.
And what?
I danced ballet. I did. I studied ballet.
And how was that? Had you studied ballet?
Very strict. Before? Very strict. Yes. No. I danced ballet from the time I was 10 on, and I performed there too. So, but I remember when I first got there, the teachers, I was in their advanced class, but then they said, we would like you to also take our intermediate class because your technique is not quite чистый русский. So I had to double up on my Russian technique, but it was a lot of fun. I improved a lot.
Was your Russian good enough to understand that your technique wasn't good enough?
So yes, what I remember distinctly also about my first time in Russia was that I had studied the equivalent of 2 years of college level Russian, university level Russian when I went, and I felt pretty good about myself. But most of my teachers were American, and most of the people I was speaking with were American. And so while we could communicate with each other, I realized when I got there that phonetics, basically where the language comes from, how people speak, was dramatically different when you're speaking with native speakers. So when I got there, even simple things like basic conversational things, I just always had to pause and think, and that was a learning curve. But I felt pretty good about my Russian by the time I left. So immersion, I'm a big fan of immersion for learning languages.
That's great.
And I had a wonderful phonetics teacher in Yaroslavl too, so she really helped.
That's great. And it's cool that you were outside of Moscow. You were in a smaller town and probably had a lot more interactions with non-English speakers.
Exactly, yes. And my advisor, Melissa Fraser, encouraged that. She's I felt at that time, especially 2001, I felt myself to be a novelty. It was easy to make friends because I was, exciting and new and different.
Right.
I don't think that students today would necessarily have that same experience, but for me, it was very exciting.
Right. I think by now they're probably sick of Americans, even those of us who do LA. Enough. And so now you're in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
and you're teaching. Tell us what you teach and what led you on the path towards environmental studies.
Okay. Well, I'm a sociologist. Environmental studies is a whole separate discipline. I'm an environmental sociologist, and for that reason, I'm in a department that is history and sociology, and the classes I teach are sociology, which is a discipline that can be applied to people wherever they are. And I'm teaching it largely to American students or in the United States, and so my classes are general sociology classes. I teach theory, social theory at the undergraduate and graduate level. I teach environmental sociology. I'm teaching it this semester. I teach globalization, and I have some other classes that I've taught theories of power and introduction to sociology, of course.
Okay, so then what made you interested in the environment? And because you've since become an environmental activist, and
I'm sorry?
You've said you consider yourself an environmental activist.
I don't know. I study environmental activists. I'm a, how I put it, conscience constituent. I'm a supporter.
You're a supporter. Okay.
I can't.
So you're there.
I'm really a scholar.
You're there. You're supporting it. You're writing about it, but you're not out there with the signs, advocating change.
I would love to see change. I would love to see change advocated. I think that's a very special word, activist, and I don't know that I would apply it to myself.
That makes sense.
I have a lot of respect for activists, so I am hesitant to put myself in their camp because they are so much more than I.
Of course.
But anyway, so no, I think that my interest in environmental issues came also from childhood. My parents would take the whole family backpacking. We'd go on these like 5 to 7 day backpacking trips in the summertime, and I just loved it. I loved being out in the wilderness, just experiencing that. And I at one point, as an adult, I commented to them, I was like, "Oh, isn't it wonderful you took our family backpacking?" And I'm sure they did enjoy it, but they said, "Oh, we did that because it was cheap when we were not rich. like state parks are free or very, very cheap, and we could just go and sleep in the woods in tents. That was great. We didn't have to go get a hotel and have expensive vacations." And here I thought it was all about the nature, but they do love nature too. So I'm sure it wasn't just that, but I thought that was amusing. Like, oh, we just did that because we didn't have money.
It's cheap.
But it inspired in me this whole passion for wilderness and the outdoors.
Totally accidental, you know. If you'd been staying in fancy hotels your whole childhood, you'd probably be on a very different path.
Probably.
Where was this? Where were you backpacking? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, so also not far from Atlanta in the southeastern United States. But my mother was raised in South Dakota. And so for her, wilderness meant wilderness like west. So we would go west. We would go to Wyoming, Colorado, Minnesota, and New Mexico. We went there once, but yeah, western trips.
Okay.
For sure.
So that's
big stretches of land, like Siberia, right? Big stretches of land with nothing there.
When were you first in Siberia?
I went to Siberia for the first time to do my dissertation research on Lake Baikal. I had never been before. I had traveled quite a bit in European Russia, and I had always wanted to see Siberia, had never been there. And so I proposed this research plan and spent, received funding to spend a year doing research in Siberia, but I'd never been there. So I was hoping I would like it, and I really did.
So you were a graduate student back in Nashville at Vanderbilt.
Yes.
And then, and what were you studying? Sociology. Yeah. Sociology. Yeah. And then you applied for a grant to go do sociological research specifically at Lake Baikal. Yes,
I proposed specifically to go to Lake Baikal. I'm an ethnographer, which I describe as essentially like being a field biologist of people. Mm-hmm. So we watch people in their native habitats doing what they normally naturally do, and we write down what they do and then analyze that data. And we interview them and talk to them as well. So I'm an ethnographer and a qualitative researcher. So for us, if you're going to be observing people in a place, the place is very important. And so I specifically selected Lake Baikal as a place that you needed to go and be at and see and watch to understand what was happening there. And I produced my book. Yeah.
And you went to Irkutsk.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you were.
So I was based in Irkutsk. Yeah.
Okay. So then tell us about the people that you observed. And, Lake Baikal is it's a big lake, to say the least. So did you interact with different groups, different ethnic groups around the lake and in the entire region, or did you stay in Irkutsk, or who did you meet?
Oh my gosh, well, I was there for a year, so I met a lot of people and traveled widely, but I will say I never made it to the north, which is still on my list. I hope to go back and see Severodbaikalsk, but I did talk to and meet with people who are from the north, so that kind of maybe counts a little bit. So my home base was Irkutsk, and then from there, I spent time in a number of smaller cities and villages around the lake in the southern side, and also in Buryatia. And I went to Ulan-Ude for a bit as well. So everything from, I don't know if you want just a list of places in that region, but Malia More and Alkhon Island are very touristy. So I went up there to kind of see that piece of it. And also Listvianka is another large tourist site with a lot of fishing villages and trails that take off from there. One of the more exciting trips that I had was with the Great Baikal Trail, which is one of the organizations I was studying. And they would put together teams of volunteers in the summertime to build or maintain hiking trails with the idea of creating ecotourism in the region as a sustainable economic platform for the region. And these would be international teams. So we had volunteers from a variety of countries, largely in Europe and the United States, and then Russians coming from across the country to build these trails. And they would do it all summer. And then during the year, they would have little activities as well, but not these volunteer teams building trails so much. That they had this regular group of volunteers that would do all kinds of things. So that was there, and then there's a number of national parks in Zapovianniki, special protected areas that are around the lake, and talking with representatives of those organizations. My goal was to get a sense of the entire field, who was doing what, where, and how they interacted, and how they thought and what they were doing. But yes, I did spend most of my time in Irkutsk because that was home.
All right, I'm gonna try and share some photos.
Sure.
Because I know that you gave us quite a few photos of Irkutsk and other places. Just give me 1 second. And I wanted to ask you sort of what was it like? Let's see, it's uploading now. What was it like studying these places, which are, have deep roots? People have been there for a very long time, and this inundation of tourists. Like, I'm very interested in that interaction between the people who come there to check it out and see it, and the people who are trying to maintain their history there. Was that a big issue?
That's a good question, and I'm thinking. So when I was there, there were tourists. Tourists were welcome. But I wouldn't say that the region was inundated. There was enough to support a tourist economy. I had friends who were tour guides. There were tour businesses. Certainly, people were glad for the influx of guests. But it was not at the time that I was doing my research. Which was 2012, 2013. Mm-hmm. It was not a flood. It was not overwhelming at the time. People were having conversations about tourist infrastructure, but it was not a pressing concern. It was actually rather talked about in a positive way as something that could promote economic development in a sustainable way. And the question was, is it going to be sustainable or not? That has changed. I was actually planning to return to study tourism. And what changed also, there were a number of things that changed, but one of them had to do with a change in the visa regime between the United States between Russia and China. And there was just this huge flood of Chinese tourists that were coming up to Baikal. And that was not a thing when I was there, hardly at all. And I did see a few Asian tourists when I was there in 2012, 2013, including from Thailand, but not that enormous number that we see now, or did see before the pandemic, coming from China. So that was very interesting. I was, had my ear to the ground, was talking to people and realizing that was a growing trend, and was causing there were already discussions about eutrophication, which is nitrogen causing overgrowth of algae in the shallow waters that chokes out other species. So too many nutrients that are causing flourishing algae that then choke out other species, which is critically important because Baikal doesn't have many shallow areas. So there's a lot of important ecosystemic activity that happens in those shallows. That was already being studied. It was already growing when I was there, but it was not on everybody's lips the way it is now with just the extreme development of tourist sites and primitive tourist sites, and the lack of infrastructure for sanitation and waste removal. So that's a very big issue now. And then during COVID, during the lockdown, Russians couldn't travel abroad anymore. And so a lot of Russians were coming to Baikal. And so the problem shifted. It was not Chinese tourists anymore. It was other Russian tourists, but the problem remained. Like the sheer number of tourists coming without the regulation and without the infrastructure for waste treatment. And that's what I was going back to study, which I'm not doing that now, but I'd be curious to see how that continues to develop.
Yes. Okay, someday. And I was going to ask you, what is your next trip back? Because I think all of us, are on hold, thinking about our next trip back to Russia and continuing our work. So then, what were the environmental issues, or what were environmental activists in Baikal most concerned about when you were there and when you were writing your dissertation?
Well, tourism was a big part of my dissertation, but like I said, it was in a stage where it was still thought of as being a positive to promote, with an eye to the future of it probably potentially being problematic if not done well and right. Now I think everyone would say it wasn't done well and right, or it's not being done well and right at a sufficient level to not cause threats to the lake. Although some of these threats that they're facing now are not unique to Baikal. So eutrophication is happening in many places. The other is microplastics, and that also has to do with our consumption economy. That it's a problem everywhere you see. At the time that I was there, the paper mill was still running, the Baikalsk pulp and paper mill, Betsibika, and it closed, I think, the year after I left. So it had been a problem, an environmental problem for such a long time, but it was still a struggle that people talked about, something people indicated. And to be perfectly honest, even though it's closed, there's still a lot of waste there that people haven't figured out what to do with. So that remains an issue, but it's been an issue for decades. So,
where is that plant?
it's in Baikalsk, which is on the eastern shore of the lake, and it's sitting right on the lake. It was built in the 60s, proposed in the late 50s, built in the 60s. So and that was actually another thing that drew my attention to Baikal as well, is because you can say that in a way that the Soviet Union had the first national environmental movement around Lake Baikal. With the proposal of building this paper mill, scientists and journalists really stepped up in the national presses and said this is not a good thing, and people started writing letters from all across the Soviet Union. It really became a touchstone, environmental touchstone, probably about a decade before that took off in Western countries. So I found that very interesting.
I was going to ask what, because I know there's a history of environmental activism at Lake Baikal, and I was interested in how that developed. And so what were your impressions of the state of environmental activism at Lake Baikal and in Russia in general? Did all of Russia care about Lake Baikal, or was it mostly a regional issue?
When I was there?
Yes.
Okay. I think so. In the same way that Baikal, my impression is that Baikal in the Russian mind is similar maybe to Yellowstone in the United States, or Yosemite, or the Grand Canyon. Like, it's a fixture. Most people know about it. They're pretty proud of it. Maybe they've been there, maybe they haven't, but it's understood as something important that needs protecting. One story that was told to me was that in the late 80s, David Brower, who is a illustrious American environmentalist, started lots of organizations. He came over to a conference with Russian scientists and environmentalists and asked them, if there's one place in all of Russia you want to protect, what would it be? And he said every single person said Baikal. So it's a touchstone, an environmentalist touchstone. It's a place that almost embodies the idea of what wilderness protection should be, what was worth saving, in the same way that Yellowstone would, or the Grand Canyon would be in the United States. So yeah, I think that it does continue to carry that important legacy. There was a year of Baikal, I believe, some point in the last 10 years as well, like as a national year.
What was your impression when you arrived at Lake Baikal? And I'm gonna share these photos
Sure, go ahead.
again, I think, and you can tell us a little bit about them. But it's such. I've only taken the train past Baikal. I've always, of course, wanted to spend time. I've wanted to walk across it in the winter. Well, not across it, but on it.
I did. I walked across it.
All the way across?
Well, it's narrow at the base and the tips, so
Okay.
we took a day and walked across one of the narrower portions. But it did take all day, and it was a lot of fun.
And it wasn't scary. I mean, has anyone ever fallen through in the winter? That's, of course.
I have no idea.
I would have asked that question.
Well, the ice is a meter thick
Okay.
by March, so it's pretty safe in February, March to do that.
What are we looking at on the screen here? I'll get back to more important questions, but it's fun to see.
Okay. I believe this is Kirov Square in Irkutsk.
Irkutsk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, and this is again the Circumbaikal Railway is this little short train that used to be part of what you think of as the Trans-Siberian, but then because of the dam, it got flooded, so they had to build a different railroad. But you can still take that little piece of it. And we were walking along it, hiking along it, and these were some fishermen's boats and their sheds along the lake. I took a picture of this because there was just a magnificently long traffic jam that we encountered. There's a 2-lane highway, and I think there was an accident or some construction, and we may have been stuck in it and got out and walked to see what was going on, and you could just see this very long traffic jam. Where did
you stay while you were in Irkutsk?
Well, I lived in a dorm, an общежитие, but around here, I mean, there's a number of little guest houses. If I was leaving. I don't remember which guest house it was, but there are lots of them. So there's a tourist infrastructure, you can find them. And this is that little piece of the railway that goes along the lake. Okay, this was from one of the very first things I did when I got there was the Great Baikal Trail trip. And so we were there for 2 weeks, building a trail and an international team, and we would we would take turns making breakfast, lunch, and dinner, cooking over a fire, and this is one of those days.
So tell us about that organization. They were building the trails or maintaining the trails, or what was their mission?
So they build and maintain. So the trails must be maintained. So they have their own trails that they have built, and then they also continue their upkeep. It's just a network of trails that around the lake at various tourist destinations. So this was in a national forest with a tour base there, and there was people were just kind of walking straight down the mountain, which is terrible for erosion, and so we put in a switchback trail for them. But yeah, so they like usually 2-week trips where you're out in the woods, living in tents, and if you're lucky, bathing in banyas and cooking over wood stoves. It was a lot of fun.
It sounds like fun. If you're used to that, which you were.
Right.
Had you ever built a trail before? I mean, was this part of? I mean, I assume this was part of your research, and this was, yes. What were you observing? What were you learning from this experience of working with? You say it was an international team, or was it mostly Russian, or what did you take away from that besides the ability to build a trail?
Okay, so yeah, I did learn how to build a trail, which I had not done before. Hiked a lot of them, never built them. It's volunteer. It was volunteer run and led. So there was like a paid executive director and assistant director, but everything else was done by young people who volunteered their time and were trained. They were trained in trail construction and maintenance and volunteer management. Just a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and energy. Really good people. It was hard to be around this collection of young people and not feel positive about I don't know, the possibilities for the future, that this generation was going to really go out there and make a difference. They really wanted to. It was incredibly, like I said, it was incredibly international, and no, not everyone spoke Russian, and so there was an interpreter on site. Also, I think that the interpreter was paid, and I think that actually the team leader did get compensated. But I know these people, and they were not. The compensation was very small, and they spent the whole year volunteering without pay. My book actually opens with a story from our last night there, because we were all sitting around the fire. We were all kind of sad to be parting ways, and somebody looked at the clock and said it was midnight, and they said, "Oh, we should sing the national anthem." And so the Russians sang the national anthem, and those of us who knew it could join. And then they said, "Oh, we should all sing our national anthems." And it was just so neat, because we went around. We had the French national anthem and the Italian national anthem and the German national anthem, and just had this moment like so many people coming together from different spaces, and some didn't even speak Russian, and some Russians did speak English. Most people spoke English, so there was that. But just this idea of coming together and sharing and being a part of something together and forming bonds. It was neat to watch that experience specifically, I would say. I was especially looking at transnational interactions at that point. Like I said, I focus a bit on globalization and transnationalism. So that was a really stunning moment from that trip. But also there was something else I took from it was a lot of corporate sponsorship that was involved. They had just been receiving lots of money from Deripaska's holding company, N+, and so everything was branded. We had T-shirts that were branded and tents that were branded, and this was a fairly new phenomenon in Russia, an old hat in the United States, but fairly new in Russia. And so there were conversations about this and this debates about the meaning of what it meant to take corporate sponsorship and maintain one's autonomy. So that was also an interesting thing to observe while I was there.
I think there are a couple pictures in here of the N+,
yes.
branding, that we'll get to.
That is Spetsebeka from across the lake. So that's the paper mill right there. That's when it was working. You can still see this.
Right there on the bank, the shore. And it was working at the time.
At the time it was working. It would not every day. It would, but it was working. Yeah.
Is that smoke we're seeing coming from it, or pollution or something?
Industrial effluvia, but that's not the worst of it. The air pollution is important, but really when it comes to paper, the construction of paper and cellulose, the water,
the runoff
is where the sludge, it's just nasty chemicals and things, and
right.
That's not, the air pollution is not the biggest problem with that mill.
Right. But, you mentioned earlier that the lake is deep in most places, but then there are shallow areas. Is that?
Oh no, it's mostly deep. Like there's just they're very like, if the shallows they are not very wide at all, and then the lake goes straight down, because the lake was made by a split in the earth. Like the tectonic plates are just pulling apart, so it's just straight down. Like I think that there's like 7 kilometers of sediment and then a mile of water. I mean, it's just super deep. But that much toxic waste is problematic. I mean, we're talking football fields of stored toxic waste right there. That to transport would be dangerous. To burn would be dangerous. It's like that. Nobody really quite knows what to do with it. It's a problem.
So from your time there studying it and talking to other activists and Russians, what were your conclusions about their ability to maintain the health of the lake and clean up the environmental problems?
Oh. Yeah. So
what grade do you give them?
Oh gosh, for my own research, I would give I would give the local environmentalists such high marks. I was completely and utterly impressed by them, and that was one of the greatest things about being there. And I think you asked, compared, like everybody in Russia knows about Baikal, but I've studied environmental activism in other places as well, and the amount of energy and optimism that I encountered in Irkutsk was just, it was an order of magnitude difference that I did not see really anywhere else that I've been in Russia. Tremendous amount of energy and positivity and optimism and just commitment and drive. I was very pleased and very impressed, and if anything, I think that I think that they should be at the table, they should be included, they should be listened to, and if anything, given more power and more opportunity to actually put in place things that they envision. That's, if anything, like I think that I would say that they should be attended to and brought into conversations much more than they have been, that I was witnessing at the time.
So is that one of the challenges for environmentalists in Russia?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't think, it's interesting compared to the United States, I would say, there's some notable differences, but I think the two are actually kind of slightly becoming a bit more similar, to be perfectly honest. But activism in general is pretty young in Russia. If anything, there was kind of a legacy of this like forced volunteerism under the Soviet Union that had to be overcome. Mm-hmm. I remember some people on my trip saying, my friends were telling me, you're paying money to go and volunteer? What, are you crazy? So that had to be overcome, but people are getting more excited about it. There, like I said, there was an energy, there was a positivity. So in the United States, activism is much older, more established, and there are policy reasons for why that also is the case. But that's actually I think the main difference that I would say is that environmental activists in the United States tend to be much more policy focused, and they push policy, they attend to policy, they try and involve themselves in government. And Russian activism, as I witnessed it, is much less so. They may be attendant to policy, but they don't. There's far less sense of, I guess, optimism or a sense that would be a successful strategy. So they focus much more on what they can do, changing minds, raising awareness, doing education projects, having conferences, those kinds of things. So that's a major difference right there. But this, in terms of where they see their stumbling blocks, in the United States, there's lots of different groups, and they're all trying to influence the government. And so environmental activists get attacked by other activists, by other groups, other interests, and you have this long conflict that goes back to the 80s at least, of like with the idea that environmentalism is bad for the economy and that they're hurting jobs or things like that kind of conversation, which was not present at all in Irkutsk when I was there. Even if I went to Baikal, where they were talking about the paper mill and it closing down, that people there was people dependent on the paper mill would still say, oh, well, Baikal is absolutely important and we absolutely have to protect it. If anything, it was just like, but we're not really actually harming it. They clean that water. It's all fine and good. It's like, okay, maybe. So it wasn't framed as a conflict in terms of development. And I think it's partly because maybe the interests they weren't struggling so much against other interests who were opposing their agenda. It all seemed to be focused much more on what couldn't be possible at the level of the state, if that makes sense.
Right.
So there wasn't a need for another group to frame them as anti-development because neither group were really trying to influence policy that much.
And where did this belief come from that the water was cleaned and that it wasn't being polluted by the paper mill?
Well, there were purification processes, and there would be, reports like, oh, you can drink a glass of water from the runoff. I would not advise it. But in the Soviet period, there were scientific studies that were showing pollution and hazards were censored. So it was very hard to get this information out. So people who'd been living there for a long time were receiving what was coming, from the state, which the state owned the paper mill until it was sold. So yeah, it was just a narrative that was promoted even at the time that it was built. So there was a large pushback against the paper mill, even when it was being built for exactly these reasons. And so there was a lot of state propaganda at the time saying, no, we're going to do it clean, we're going to do it well. And they said, to the best of their abilities, they did, but you can't really ever make a clean paper mill. That's just not going to happen.
Do you think in the United States we think the same thing? I mean, my observation is it's hard for Americans to believe that, oh, that can't possibly be dirty, polluted water. And then when we see it on the news, we're shocked. Like, oh, pollution, where did that come from? I mean, I think it's changed over time. We're more understanding now that everything's not so clean. But people want to believe that their water is clean.
There's a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance that goes on with modern society. At some level, like we engage in a stunning number of practices, and we have absolutely no idea how much harm they're causing in the doing. So it's understandable. It's a fairly constant state of being. You have to be made aware, which again is why activists are so important. Because
it sounds like you could talk for hours just on that. How we should change our ways to save the planet. Here's a picture of the N+ branding on your tent.
Yes.
This is a nice moody picture.
Irkutsk at night. Yeah.
Irkutsk is a beautiful city.
It truly is. This is the view of Baikal from one of the hiking trails that the Great Baikal Trail maintains.
Beautiful. And of course, you were there for a year, so you saw it in all seasons.
I did. Yeah.
Is this the train station?
That is the train station. Yes.
And
it's not even just the lake, as you can see. I mean, the taiga all around that area and it's so different because there's parts around the lake that are steppe, and there's parts that are taiga. There's parts that are rainforest. I mean, it's just a really remarkable place. So even if you're leaving the lake and just going off on these trails, you can see the most beautiful things. They have around this area a lot of rock figurations that you can hike to and see. There's one shaped like a turtle and another that's shaped like a witch, I think. Like in New Hampshire, the old man on the mountain is that kind of image.
I was going to ask you, when you're there, were you thinking about all of your hiking in the American West? Did it remind you of anything? Did it feel different?
Oh no, it doesn't feel completely different. But I guess it would remind me maybe of, I'm guessing, up near, in Minnesota, near the Boundary Waters, maybe, just that northern forest. Maybe around Glacier, perhaps, I don't know.
Were there other Americans there that you interacted with?
Not on a regular basis that I can recall. There was a young man who came for a short period and was studying. He was studying non-proliferation, and I think this was the language training that he was a part of. And he lived in the dorm for us. We didn't overlap very much. He came shortly before I left, but we're still in touch.
Were there any American environmental activists
in Irkutsk?
Yeah, or just that came through Lake Baikal to work or to participate?
Oh, yes. I mean, an activist again is a stretch because some of these are professionals, right? So, all of these. The organizations that I studied, because again, my focus was on these transnational ties, they were very linked in to a global network of communities. And in fact, that was another one of the great observations that I had is how important those ties were for spurring creative thought, essentially, just getting to take little pieces of ideas from other people and reapplying them in your own setting. There were a couple trips from members of the Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, who came to help with, I think, like a map building, brochure making sort of project around trail making. They interacted a lot with professional trail builders. This is the Great Baikal Trail.
Mhm.
So there was, I guess you could call Bob Berkby an activist, and other scholars like myself who had come through. There were other Americans, lots of other Americans that I know who had participated with GBT.
Mhm.
But at the time that I was there, I'm thinking about there's a woman who works at the Forest Service who had been executive director of the Tahoe Baikal Institute, which was another organization that I studied. She had been in the past, and she would come over regularly. She had a lot of ties in that region. There's a lot of people really knew, there's some characters, there's some names, some very important people who were nodes, I would say, between networks in the United States and in the region, the Baikal region.
I'm just wondering if
Mhm.
what the impressions were of the Americans who came there and helped, and if there was a sense of, connection.
My impression, again, because some of these people were long-standing figures, they were beloved. They were absolutely beloved. Everybody talked about Hank Birnbaum. Everyone talked about Gary Cook, Jennifer Lee. They were just these were ours. they were, and all of the people who came, generally speaking, not all of them. I don't know that Bob Berkby speaks Russian, but a lot of them are people who already are invested in Russian. So there's all kinds of opportunities to talk. And then Russians who emigrated to the United States would come back. The first executive director of GBT now lives in the United States, but she would regularly come back. And there was, people remembered, especially the ones who came back regularly, people remembered them and talked very fondly of them. And there used to be a good deal of exchange that was happening, especially in the 90s, where groups, like whole teams from like Baikal would travel to California, sponsored, but it's a kind of cultural exchange. And these experiences meant so much to people. They remembered them, very fondly, very vividly.
Let's click through a few more pictures here. This looks like your kitchen.
At the camp.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Lots of soup.
Lots of soup. Lots of moss. It's so beautiful there.
It really is.
I'm
missing it.
I was going to ask, when were you last there?
2018.
2018. What were you doing there in 2018?
Oh, I could only stay for about 2 weeks, but I was invited to participate in the I'm trying to remember the name, the Baikal International Ecological Water Forum, which was something the governor's office put on. I don't know if they still are, but they were doing it annually. This was the second one, and I was invited to speak at their plenary. And I came and stayed and saw friends, donated copies of my books to the library, things like that.
The governor of that region?
Yes, at the time there.
So how effective is the regional government in supporting environmental issues? Like, does that government in that region, is that a big priority for them?
I mean, I can't. I'm at a loss to say, actually. Things change, right?
Mm-hmm.
And leadership changes as well. I think I'm loath to answer because I have mixed responses. I think it's hard to say. There have been so many laws recently, especially at the federal level, that really so much federal action impinges what can and can't be done at the local level. And Baikal has been largely protected by the law of Baikal, which is really extraordinarily important and well-designed, well-crafted law. What happens around Baikal has to be more or less, or should be more or less, in compliance with that law. There have been some federal laws that have been looking to tweak and roll back some of these, I think under economic pressures. But there was a prosecutor that was very actively pursuing environmental cases around breaching the law of Baikal, but it's all in flux. It's hard to say. Like, there's so many different parties. I don't want to make a blanket statement about.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course,
I don't think I would put it like this. I think that environmentalists would love to see a more environmentally conscious government at all levels than what they have at present. But I think sometimes that there's so much energy and it's such an important part of the region that I think that there's willingness maybe to hear at some points, at some levels, by some parties. It's complicated.
In this area, do you think environmentalists in Russia, the ones you've interacted with, do they look to the American experience as a model, or what is it? How do they? What about our way of influencing environmental policy resonates with them? What do they think they can take from us or learn from us?
The things that they have learned, I would say, they've been very impressed by the ones that I talked to at any rate. Very impressed by Leave No Trace. And
explain what that is.
Certainly, it's essentially an ethic that when you go out into the wilderness and then you leave, that the wilderness is the same as when you were there. So, pack out all your trash with you. At some levels, pack out your waste with you. That you take only photographs, leave only footprints. Like you don't go out and cut down trees to burn fires. Like nature shouldn't be different after you visit it. You should not go out and harm so that the next person would see either your waste or your destruction, or you take things with you when you go. If everybody did that, you would end up having diminished your resource. So when I was there, there was a big push around interpretation, which is again the idea of having well-marked signs, well-marked explanations, having guides who could really explain the meaning of what you are encountering in nature. So that the idea that, again, thinking if we can build an infrastructure around interpretation, then people would also learn these habits and understand kind of how to best interact with nature when they're out in it.
And you're saying that those lessons have taken effect.
Well, amongst the activists, for sure. I can't really speak to how that's happening on the ground. It probably isn't. It's a heavy lift considering the numbers of people who are coming and how many of them actually get to interact with this cadre of people who are trying to push this way of interacting with nature. And there's a lot of informal economic activity around tourism that again, it's flying under the radar, and so it's probably not being done right.
Heels on the shore of Lake.
Heels on the beach, yeah. You look good no matter where you are. This was building the trail. This was the team that was building the trail.
What's this?
One of the many rock formations. I don't know that this one is named, but it's right there by some of the other rock formations. And the shore. You can see how steep it is.
I know, and I get that just goes right down.
Yeah.
Were you amazed at how big the lake is? Did you expect it to be so big?
Well, it's I read all about it before I got there, so I had all the scientific facts that I at my disposal. It's the thing is that it's actually very narrow though, so you can almost always see across it. Maybe not the widest stretch. The widest stretch you don't, but for a lot of the southern portion, you can see the other shore. So it doesn't feel as big as it actually is because it's really deep. That's where when you think, well, you can't even, when you think about what it means to actually go a mile down, it's stunning.
It's crazy.
This is by the hydroelectric dam on the Angara River, and people jumping into it in the summertime on hot days. I did not do that. This is a souvenir stand. So the Baikal is famous because it has the only freshwater seal, the nerpa, and their babies, nerpionok, is bright white. And so this just sort of like, I think of it as the totem of Lake Baikal. It's all over the place. I brought one back to my daughter when I went in 2018. So she has a little nerpa. And my mother has a shirt with a nerpa on it. I just love the nerpa. Everybody loves the nerpa. Oh yes, I don't think this is there anymore. But in 2012, 2013, Lennon Street had a coffee house that was very clearly borrowing from Starbucks's logo and font. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, perhaps now it's back to Lennon Street.
It could be. It could be.
I love these old homes. This old architecture.
Irkutsk is famous for that. Because it has these very old wooden buildings, but other parts of Irkutsk burnt, and they rebuilt with stone in the 19th century. It had these gorgeous 19th century facades right alongside these very old classical Siberian homes. And sadly, a lot of them are catching fire and burning these days.
Really?
Yeah, so we're losing them very quickly, and they also are for a variety of reasons settling. Like I assume it's connected to permafrost melting, but they're sinking quite a ways too.
Really? So all of this is connected. The permafrost is melting.
I think so. I don't want to be necessarily quoted on that, but my understanding, at least, is that I know that is a phenomenon, and also that they're sinking.
Are there more fires than normal?
Fire is always a concern in that region. But as for the old houses burning, I mean, they're very old. It could be a wiring issue. There's often people suspecting arson because the land is very valuable, and they would probably want to put, something larger and more modern there and make more money off of it. But and I don't think you can't actually, these are all protected, but if they accidentally burn, so that's always a rumor that's going around. There's a lot of rumors always.
Now, did this house sink?
Yes.
This is why the windows are below the street. Okay, that is some awesome sinking.
Oh,
church.
That church has the most amazing frescoes inside. It's so beautiful. Okay. Oh. This is the opposite of leave no trace. It's a very a habit at the time, especially, probably still is, where you would leave or bury your trash, and there'd be these trash pits right in these tourist areas. So this was a work project that was cleaning up trash pits
or like removing the trash from the trash pits.
Yes.
And then are these? Well,
that's a schoolhouse. I'm trying to remember where that one is. If it's, I was following along activists who were doing educational work in. I'm trying to remember some of the villages we went, Porto Baikal and Baikalsk, and a few others that we went to. Some of these very small, small villages, and this was a schoolhouse. I just loved that the wood paneling and the living plants, even you can see in these large windows. So there's all this natural light coming in.
I love it.
It was charming. It did not have running water. It didn't have running water, but it did have this gorgeous room. So.
And then posters about Baikal.
Yes.
So do you so you see that there's an appreciation among the communities there. The children are raised to love their lake.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
How do you use Russia and Baikal in your teaching, in your sociology classes? What role does Russia play in that?
Oh, it always comes up just because it's probably the place I know next best to my knowledge of the United States, and so. I don't say that I sit down and plan a lesson where I'm necessarily including Russia, but it happens all the time where I'll bring up an aside because I'm illustrating some concept or just, sociological theory. It applies in a lot of different cases. And so I would draw cases from my experience in Russia as well.
Did any of your students, did they want to go off to Baikal and do research? Get them
Not
hooked
do
on
research, maybe. I mean, I'm at an engineering school, so we don't have. I don't know how many engineers want to go and do sociology, but I did have one student who came to my office saying, "I heard you study Russia and environmental issues, and I'm interested in both." And I was like, "Great, that's awesome." And she's gone on to get her master's degree in Russian studies through the Erasmus program. So she and I co-authored an article together based on data that I collected when I was in graduate school. So I did sort of a pilot study where I was looking at collective memory and memories of the Soviet Union, and took a number of interviews, and then just never used it because I was more interested in my environmental work. And so she and I worked on that together. She could read Russian, she wanted to practice Russian, so she could read the interviews, and then we co-authored an article on memories of the Soviet Union.
Well, that's interesting. That's a whole nother very interesting topic.
It really is. It really is.
And what are these?
That's so art, chainsaw sculptures from logs.
Cool.
They also carve ices with chainsaws.
Yeah,
So again, yeah, this is just up there. Like it says, So that there's just a sign on the side of the road that has endemic Baikal, and Baikal is really very important to people in the region.
Oh yeah, I didn't. It says endemic.
Endemic at the top because the NERPA is endemic. It's only found there, nowhere else.
Oh, the snow is beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And this is Baikalsk, which has a lot of snow, and it's on the other side of the lake. There's very little snow; it blows away, and so you'd go from steppe, where it's just the snow blows right off, to right across the lake where it piles up. I mean, just like feet and feet and feet of snow.
I would want to be on that side of the lake.
This
is the ice.
That's the ice, yeah, a meter thick.
So someone from the audience has asked where they can find your book about Baikal.
Sure, it's published by Oxford University Press, and it's called Saving the Sacred Sea. So, I don't know that there's a Russian translation, but it's in English. It's available online, I'm sure.
So what is your when you can go back, what tell us more about your next project?
Okay.
Regarding Baikal.
Well, again, so we'll see. When I can go back, we'll look at what's happening there, and what the new arrangements are that are worthy of studying. At the time, like I said, I was very interested in the growth of tourism, and especially this how I guess from the conversations that I was having, and the kind of there was actually quite a bit of protest in 2018, 2019 that I was really excited about go and get my fingers into. That it seemed more about using nature as an identity, and claiming, like Siberians claiming this place and making sure that their portrayals of nature and their understanding of nature were also about sort of like cordoning off and saying, wait, these tourists who are coming from China, this is using kind of a boundary maintenance against this influx of tourists from China, and then also during COVID, then from Russians from outside of the region as well. So you have this kind of insider-outsider perspective, and how nature is understood and described in that process. So I was very interested in that, because that was not something I saw 10 years ago when I was there. So I was looking at this idea of, I mean, there was a little bit of boundary maintenance, but it wasn't as palpable, I don't think, because of this shift eastward and the influx of Chinese tourists. So I don't. Mm-hmm.
Was it more about we want to preserve the sort of the spiritual, natural sort of meaning of the place versus too many people are coming here. I can't go to a store without other people being in there. I don't want all these people here. It sounds different than the typical.
It is different. And I don't want to paint with one broad brushstroke, because I'm sure there are lots of conversations that are happening, but I think it was more of a sense of a feeling of place attachment. Like this is special to me, and I love this place, and it's being abused and for the benefit of other people who are not us, right? That outsiders are coming in and laying waste, causing eutrophication, leaving trash everywhere, like having disturbing natural ecosystems, just spoiling nature, and then leaving. And there's even this element of, and the benefit, not only just the benefit of having been there, but also the economic benefit was also not really being kept locally either. So even that aspect of it, like some people would go to restaurants or not, but a lot of the tourist groups seem to be, especially from China, having their own like Chinese businesses, Chinese tourist enterprises, that this money was not actually diffusing out into the community. There was just a lot of harm being done to the environment, and then the locals were left with the waste and not economic benefit or benefit of the enjoyment of their own natural beauty. And it's very similar when it started coming from European Russia and droves as well. It was just kind of like, this is too much, and we're not really benefiting. And then the question of how we're going to develop infrastructure in a way that we can do this sustainably long term.
And are you still in touch with your colleagues back in Baikal?
I am somewhat, not as much as I used to be, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we're all looking forward to going back. Thank you very much for spending this time with us and telling us about your experiences at Lake Baikal and in Russia. And thank you for the tour around the lake. Appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. And so good luck, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you. I'm always glad to talk about Baikal and environmental issues in Russia.
Sometime I would love to go there.